Chapter 3 Lost in the Maze. Fern waved to the girls through the sheet of ice. Her mouth opened and closed, but Rachel and Kirsty couldn't hear a word she was saying. The ice was just too thick. Rachel looked worried. "Fern must be freezing in there," she said. "We've got to get her out." "Well, we could smash the ice with a stick," said Kirsty, and then she frowned. "But Fern might get hurt." Rachel thought hard. "We could melt the ice," she said. "How?" Kirsty asked. "Like this," Rachel replied. She reached up and she pressed her hand firmly against the window of ice. Kirsty did the same. The ice felt freezing cold, but they kept pressing against it with their warm hands, and soon a few drops of water began to trickle down the window. "It's melting," Rachel said. "I think we can make a hole in it now." She gently poked the middle of the window with her finger, and the ice began to crack. "Don't worry, Fern," said Kirsty. "You'll be out of there very soon." There was a sudden crack as the ice split open. A flash of sparkling fairy dust shot out, leaving behind the smell of cut grass. And then Fern, the green fairy, pushed her way out of the tree trunk, her wings fluttering limply. She wore a bright green top and stretchy pants with pretty leaf shapes around her waist and her neck. She had small acorn-colored boots on her tiny feet, earrings, and a pendant that looked like little green leaves. Her long brown hair was tied into pigtails, and her trim emerald wand was tipped with gold. "Oh, I'm so cold," the fairy gasped, shivering all over. She floated down to rest on Kirsty's shoulder. "Let me warm you up a bit," said Rachel. She scooped the fairy up and held her in her cupped hands, and then she blew gently on her. The warmth of Rachel's breath seemed to do the trick. Fern stopped shivering and her wings straightened out. "Thank you," she said. "I feel much better now." "I'm Rachel, and this is Kirsty," Rachel explained. "We're here to take you to the pot at the end of the rainbow. Ruby, Amber, and Sunny are waiting for you there," Kirsty added. Fern's green eyes lit up. "They're safe?" she exclaimed. "That's wonderful." She flew off of Rachel's hand in a burst of green fairy dust and twirled happily into the air. "But what about my other sisters?" "Don't worry. We're going to find them too," Kirsty told her. "But how did you get stuck behind an ice window?" "Well, when I landed on Rainspout Island, I got tangled up in the ivy of the tower," Fern explained. "I managed to untangle myself, but then Jack Frost's goblin started chasing me, and so then I flew into the maze and I hid in the oak tree. It was raining, and when the goblins passed by, their evil magic turned the rainwater into ice, and, well, I was trapped." Suddenly, Rachel shivered. "It's getting colder," she said. She glanced up at the sky. The sun had disappeared behind a cloud, and there was a sudden chill in the air. "The goblins must be close by," Kirsty gasped, looking scared. Fern nodded. "Yeah, we'd better get out of this yard right away," she said. "You know the way, don't you?" Rachel and Kirsty looked at each other. I'm not sure," Kirsty said with a frown. "Do you know, Rachel?" Rachel shook her head. "No," she replied, "but we could follow the fairy trail back to the beginning of the maze." Kirsty looked around. "Where is the fairy trail?" she asked. An icy breeze was blowing all around them now. The green fairy leaves were drifting away and disappearing. "Oh, no!" Kirsty cried. "What are we going to do now?" Suddenly, they heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming through the maze towards them. "I know that fairy's in here somewhere," grumbled a loud, gruff voice. Fern, Rachel, and Kirsty looked at one another with wide eyes. "Goblins," whispered Rachel. The next chapter, chapter 4, is called Fairy Fireworks. Chapter 4, Fairy Fireworks. Rachel, Kirsty, and Fern listened in horror as the goblins came closer. As usual, they were arguing with each other. "Come on," snorted one goblin. "We can't let her get away again." "Stop bossing me around," grumbled the other one. "I'm going as fast as I can." Ow! Just then there was a loud thud. It sounded like someone had fallen over. "If your feet weren't so big, you wouldn't be tripping over them," jeered the first goblin. "They're big enough to give you a good kick," the other goblin snapped. "Let's hide in the tree," Fern whispered to Rachel and Kirsty. "I'll make you fairy-sized so we can all fit under a leaf." Quickly, she shot up into the air and sprinkled the girls with fairy dust. Rachel and Kirsty gasped as they felt themselves shrinking down and down. Oh, it was so exciting. Once they were small enough, Fern took the girls' hands. "Let's go," she said, and the three of them fluttered up into the air and landed on a branch. Fat brown acorns grew in the tree as big as beach balls. Even the tiniest twigs looked like tree trunks to the tiny girls. Fern lifted up one edge of the leaf, which was as big as a tablecloth, and all three of them crept underneath. A moment later, the goblins came rushing into the clearing. "Where can that fairy be?" one of them grumbled. "I know she came this way." They began to search around the bottom of the tree. "How are we going to get back to the pot?" Rachel whispered to Fern. "Kirsty and I aren't very good at flying. The goblins would catch us if we try." Fern laughed. "Don't worry. I think I know someone who can help us." And she pointed behind them. Rachel and Kirsty turned to look. A gray, furry face was peeking shyly from around the tree trunk. It was a squirrel. "Hello," Fern called out softly. The squirrel jumped and hid behind the trunk. Then he peeked out again, his dark eyes curious. "Maybe he'd like an acorn," Kirsty suggested. There was a big, shiny nut growing right next to her. She wrapped her arms around it, but she couldn't pull it off the twig. It was just too big. Rachel and Fern came to help, and all three of them tugged at the acorn until it came off the branch with a crack. Fern held the acorn out to the squirrel. A yummy treat," she said. The squirrel ran lightly along the branch, his long, furry tail waving. He took the acorn and held it in his front paws. What's your name?" asked Fern kindly. "I'm Fluffy," squeaked the squirrel between nibbles. "I'm Fern," said the fairy, "and these are my friends Rachel and Kirsty. We need to get away from the goblins. Will you help us?" Fluffy shivered. "I don't like goblins," he squeaked. "Yeah, won't let you get hurt," Fern promised, stroking his head. "But could you give us a ride on your back? You can jump from hedge to hedge much better than we can, and we have to get out of this maze." "Yes, I'll help you," Fluffy agreed. And he finished the last piece of his acorn. Rachel, Kirsty, and Fern climbed onto the squirrel's back. Kirsty thought it felt like sinking into a big, soft blanket. "This is great," said Fern, snuggling down into the squirrel's fur. "Let's go, Fluffy." The squirrel turned and ran along the branch. Rachel, Kirsty, and Fern clung tightly to Fluffy's thick fur as he jumped right out of the tree, right over the goblins' heads. He landed on the closest hedge, and the goblins were so busy arguing they didn't even notice. Fern leaned forward to whisper into the squirrel's ear, "Well done, Fluffy. Now the next one." Rachel gulped when she saw how far away the next hedge was. "Maybe Fluffy needs some fairy magic to help him," she said. "No, he doesn't," Fern replied, her green eyes twinkling. "He'll be fine." Fluffy leapt into midair. He sailed across the gap and landed safely on top of the next hedge. Rachel and Kirsty grinned at each other. This was so exciting. It was a bit bumpy, but Fluffy's fur felt like a big, soft cushion. The squirrel was moving so fast that it wasn't long before they had left the goblins far behind. "We made it," Fern said at last as Fluffy reached the edge of the maze. "Now, which way do we go, girls?" Rachel and Kirsty looked at each other in dismay. This isn't the way that we came in," Rachel said. "I don't know the way to the bay. I don't know the way back to the pot from here. Do you, Kirsty?" Kirsty shook her head. Fern looked worried. "Well, I have to get back to the pot because that's where my sisters are." "Oh," Kirsty said. She had an idea. "Rachel, what about looking into our magic bags for help?" "Oh, good idea," Rachel agreed. Titania, the fairy queen, had given Rachel and Kirsty 2 special magic bags for whenever they needed help rescuing the fairies. The girls took the bags with them everywhere, just in case. Kirsty opened her backpack and looked inside. One of the magic bags was glowing with a silvery light. "Oh, I wonder what's inside," she said, and she reached in. She pulled out a thin green stick covered with sparkling gold stars. "It looks like a sparkler," Rachel said. "That's not much use, is it?" "Oh, it's a fairy sparkler," said Fern excitedly. "I can use it to write a message in the sky, and my sisters will see it from the pot, and then they'll know that we need some help." "What about the goblins?" Rachel asked. "Won't they see it too and know where we are?" Fern looked serious. "We've got to take the risk," she said. Fern held the sparkler in one hand, her wings fluttering. She lit the top of it with her wand and quickly flew into the sky. Rachel and Kirsty held their breath. Fern and the sparkler shot upwards, trailing bright green sparks behind them. Fern flew higher and higher up into the sky and used the sparkler to write a message in a shower of emerald stars. The stars spelled out these words: "Help! We're lost." They twinkled brightly in the darkening sky before fading away. "We won't have to wait long," Fern said, landing beside Rachel and Kirsty on the ground. "Help will be here soon." Rachel and Kirsty wondered what would happen. How could the fairies come to the rescue? They weren't even supposed to leave the pot at the end of the rainbow in case the goblins found them. Suddenly, the leaves behind Rachel, Kirsty, and Fern rustled. "Did you see that fairy sparkler?" shouted a loud goblin voice. "It came from over here. Quick, before that fairy gets away again." Chapter 5. Hedgehog Help.